Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visits the Sumy Oblast, 1 year on after Russia withdrew its troops on the ground, but Moscow continues to shell the region.
The group Nuclear Weapons Ban Monitor says Russia and China are mostly to blame for an increase in the world's nuclear weapons arsenal.
Protests continue in Israel despite a pause to a controversial plan to overhaul the country's legal system.
The European Commission's Transport Department chief has resigned from his position over a scandal involving free flights from Qatar.
A group of elderly women take the Swiss government to the European Court of Human Rights for harming them with their climate change policies.
King Charles has arrived in Germany in his first state visit abroad since becoming British monarch.
It's the nearest Ukraine's president has been to the border with Russia since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of his country in February 2022. Volodymyr Zelensky visited the northeastern Sumy region to mark the anniversary of its recapture from Russian troops. In the early weeks of the conflict, several towns there became the focus of fierce battles. Russian forces, however, are continuing to shell the region. They hit the town of Bilopilia on Tuesday morning, damaging a school building and an apartment block. Meanwhile, there are signs of war damage being repaired. The town of Staryi Saltiv in Ukraine's Kharkiv Oblast bears heavy traces of the war. A small number of civilians in the town are trying to survive among the ruins. On the diplomatic front, Ukraine's foreign minister has taken part in a virtual session in the US-led Summit for Democracy.
No other nation wants peace more than Ukraine, but peace at any cost is an illusion. For peace to be a lasting one, it needs to be just. The cessation of Russia's aggression and the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity are essential conditions for peace.
Russia says it's willing to talk peace, but stresses its security concerns come first.
On Wednesday, the group Nuclear Weapons Ban Monitor warned that the global arsenal of nuclear weapons is increasing. If all the world's weapons were used, the effect would be equal to 135,000 Hiroshima-sized catastrophes. That was the last nuclear attack when the United States bombed the Japanese city of Hiroshima in 1945. Last year, 9,440 warheads were ready to use. That number's now 9,576. There are 9 nuclear states, and in its report, the group blames China and Russia for producing most of this year's additional nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine has increased the possibility of a nuclear conflict.
Demonstrators gathered in Jerusalem to protest talks on the government's controversial judicial overhaul plan that has divided the country. Israeli President Isaac Herzog has offered to mediate negotiations between political leaders to find a solution to the country's worst political crisis in decades. The talks followed widespread protests, which forced Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to announce a pause in his plan. But skepticism around the overhaul remains high among those who've been on the streets for weeks, decrying the move, which they say threatens Israel's democracy.
I don't believe our Prime Minister, and I don't believe that there's any negotiations on the very basic values of democracy.
The overhaul would curtail the authority of the Supreme Court and give politicians greater powers over the selection of judges. Despite widespread criticism, the move has strong support among far-right voters and religious Israelis.
ממשלה שתשנה את כל מערכת המשפט, שתעשה פה רפורמה נכונה, מתוקנת שהעם בחר בה, ממשלה שיש לה 64 מנדטים. והרפורמה המשפטית חשובה בשבילי, כי אני רוצה שמי שיבחר את ההחלטות בשבילי זה אנשים שאני בחרתי, ולא אנשים שאינם קשורים לבחירות של העם.
The plan's backers argue the changes are needed to rebalance powers between lawmakers and judges.
In Myanmar, the political party of deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi will be dissolved for failing to re-register under a new electoral law. According to the military-controlled Electoral Commission, the National League for Democracy was among 40 political parties that failed to meet a deadline for an election. In November 2020, the NLD had won a landslide victory in the country's parliamentary elections. But less than 3 months later, the army carried out a coup and jailed Aung San Suu Kyi.
The European Commission's Transport Department chief will resign from his post after it was revealed that he received free flights from Qatar. Heinrich Holloway was facing an internal investigation after the revelation showed he accepted free flights from the Qatari government, while his team was negotiating a major aviation deal with the Gulf state's own airline. Surprisingly, though, he'll continue working at the European Commission.
At his request, the college has decided to appoint Heinrich Holloway, who is currently the Director General for Mobility and Transport, to the position of hors-classe advisor, as the position is called in the Director General for International Partnerships, and that this decision is effective as of the 1st of April.
The revelations came after the European Parliament's very own corruption scandal involving Qatar, in which the Gulf state allegedly paid large sums of cash to EU lawmakers in return for influence. There's been no evidence to suggest that the European Commission was involved in this scandal, but transparency NGOs have widely criticised Brussels' ethics rules as weak. Holloway's decision will come as a relief to the Commission, which was initially defending his choice to accept the free Qatar flights, since all his missions were within the rules. But surprisingly, it was Holloway himself that approved his own free flights. Some MEPs say that the Commission's response is unacceptable.
Is it enough of a consequence if he is just moving from one job to another, basically keeping his same salary? I don't think so. As far as I understand, there is still a disciplinary procedure ongoing. So that's up now to the Commission services to determine that. But I think it clearly shows we cannot have Director Generals that authorize their own exception of free flights or gifts or whatever. Independent oversight, and when the rules are broken, there need to be sanctions, not just a reshuffle where people move to another job with the same pay.
The EU's watchdog has already asked the Commission to provide details on business trips made by senior staff members since 2021 that were partly paid for by third parties.
A group of Swiss women whose average age is 73 is taking their government to the European Court of Human Rights. The Senior Women for Climate Protection group says Switzerland's climate policies are putting them at risk. They say their rights to both life and health are being infringed.
Es wurde nachgewiesen, dass wir älteren Frauen besonders empfindlich sind. Die Übersterblichkeit ist nachgewiesen, weil wir einfach ein bisschen mehr noch als ältere Männer oder als andere Personengruppen schneller krank werden von den Hitzewellen.
Switzerland doesn't deny that climate change can affect health, but it argues that emissions can't specifically be tied to the health of older women. And it says climate action is a matter for politicians to decide. The verdict could have important repercussions, not only for the 46 member states of the European Council, but the whole world.
King Charles arrived in Germany on Wednesday, his first state visit abroad since becoming British monarch, as part of efforts to turn the page on years of rocky relations between Britain and the European Union after its exit from the bloc. He had been due to travel to France first, but cancelled it due to violent social unrest gripping the streets there.
Ja, da bin ich mal gespannt. Ich frage mich, was also sprechen wird, warum kommen wird und was uns zu erzählen hat. Ja, es ist auch ganz spannend, weil wir eigentlich auch in dem gleichen Hotel übernachten dann werden und was dann die Sicherheitsbestimmungen so sein werden, wird bestimmt spannend, ob wir ihn mal zu sehen kriegen oder nicht.
Er wird seine Sache sicher gut machen, anders wie seine Mutter. Und da warten wir mal ab, was auf uns zukommt in nächster Zeit.
This is the first state visit by a British monarch in 8 years, and it will reinforce what Buckingham Palace called shared histories, culture and values.
Tourists are flocking to see Michelangelos David in Florence following an uproar in the U.S. after a principal was forced to resign over complaints about a lesson featuring the statue. One parent in Florida called it pornography. 2 others said that they should have been notified before it was shown. While in Italy, where the statue is housed, people expressed surprise over the controversy.
This is so strange that the icon of the Renaissance could be called pornographic. You know, you have to distinguish between nudity and pornography, and this is absolutely not the same.
American tourists are also lining up to see the statue, expressing disappointment that the dispute happened in the first place.
I feel incredibly sorry for the children that don't get to see it from the principal's point of view. I think it's just sad, and I'm I'm glad I don't live there.
So I actually just saw the article about this, and it's part of history. I don't understand how you can say that it's pornographic.
Over the weekend, both the mayor of Florence and the museum director where the statue is shown invited the principal and the school's community to come and see the famous artwork for themselves.